the most important thing for an artist and most joyous thing for an artist to happen in their lifetime is to have an audience to listen to their work, no matter what the medium, to have critical acclaim, and then lastly, monetization, to validate the fact that your art has a value in the economy, which happens to be the creator economy these days.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, Mahati Rangarajan, and you're listening to Maharani Talks. I'm really excited to share with you all that it's been a year since I started Maharani Talks. And one of the first podcasters I reached out to was Nikesh Murali, who's always been very supportive from day one. So you can understand my excitement that I finally get to sit down with him and have a wonderful discussion about his incredible work as a writer, voice actor, and the creator behind Indian Noir, a critically acclaimed chart-topping podcast that tells thrilling crime and horror stories. And it has now become a Spotify exclusive. As a writer, Nikesh's work spans close to 2 decades, with a body of work that includes a multi-award-winning Amazon best-selling short story collection, The Killing Fields, and the novel His Night Begins. As one of the earliest players in the Indian podcast industry, in this 2-part episode, I talked to Nikesh about Indian Noir's contribution to the country's horror and crime genre and the evolving scene of the podcast industry in India, and many more interesting topics. So let's jump right in. Hi, Nikesh. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hey, Mahdi, thank you for having me. It's not always one gets to speak to the Queen, so thank you for having me on Maharani Talks. And I've said this to you several times in the last few years. This is one of my favorite interview podcasts. And, you really bring in your skills as a business journal into the interview. And I've thoroughly enjoyed your work. So I can't believe I am being interviewed. And I very much look forward to the next hour or so that I'm going to spend with you.
That's so kind of you. And it's completely my honor. In fact, I've said it many times earlier as well, that you're one of the first podcasters I reached out to. And I honestly didn't, expect you to be so supportive and so sweet and so kind always from the beginning. So I don't think I ever told you this, but this was something that I had in mind for quite some time to interview you at a certain milestone of the podcast. Say I completed 1 year, then I would interview you.
Congratulations. That is such a big milestone, that 1 year mark. I remember my 1 year mark as well. I think that's when I started feeling comfortable with the process. So such an important step. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. For you, it must have been early 2019, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yes. Early 2019. It was when His Night Begins, the crime show, got rolling in its first season, and you would have these kind of pockets of fans for the show who would occasionally tweet about it. There was that big article in Hindu had happened at that stage that drove in a lot of traffic, and at that 1 year mark, all those incidents were like omens guiding me to keep going. So I hope you too get those omens so that you can keep going and doing wonderful things.
Thank you. But did you ever feel overwhelmed when you had that sudden rush of attention?
No, I felt validated after a long time, and it was confirmation that I was on the right path. So it was a real boost to work harder, and this is so important when it comes to art, knowing that you have an audience. Even when you are like in your early stages, even if it's a small writers group that you can go to and 2 people listen to you, or even if it's someone at home who listens to your work, it's just so important to have an audience.
I agree, yeah. And to finally get that, even if it's from a niche group, to get that validation, it really boosts an artist's confidence.
Absolutely.
But when you look back, does it feel like, oh my God, it's much simpler days and you've learned a lot? And do you sometimes cringe when you look back at earliest episodes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think a lot of people compliment on my voice, but I'm just like everyone else. I cringe when I hear my own voice. It's taken so long to get used to it. But to your question, technically, I do cringe when I listen to those first episodes because I've improved over 150 episodes in terms of my skills when it comes to narration, writing, audio production, in particular the plugins and the SFX and the BGM that's used has improved vastly. But then again, when you look back at that, it is a real testament that the podcast has survived. That it's in those initial months, it's purely surviving on my voice and narration skills and nothing else, and very little SFX if at all. So so it's a cringe thing, but it's also a real boost to know that. Let's say a day comes when I have access to no plugins, nothing, then I'll still be able to tell a story just with my voice.
Yeah, that's definitely a testament to your narration. In fact, I read somewhere that if you're not embarrassed by your earliest work, it means you haven't grown as an artist.
Absolutely. Such a good saying. While it's important to feel that confidence that, you can actually entertain people, I think it's important to look to improve, and there's nothing better than your earlier work that is a good barometer for where you are heading to.
Yeah.
I think audio as a medium in particular, given that it's competing against the visual medium, which is scaling so fast with VFX and great acting and great storytelling, you have an added onus to keep improving. So yeah, that's a great saying.
And a huge congrats on the Spotify exclusive.
Thank you.
How did it feel when, it came through?
Yeah, I think in the social media post that I put out announcing the news, I said that, the most important thing for an artist and most joyous thing for an artist to happen in their lifetime is to have an audience to listen to their work, no matter what the medium, to have critical acclaim, and then lastly, monetization to validate the fact that your art has a value in the economy, which happens to be the creator economy these days.
Yeah.
And I'm very glad that I was able to enjoy that during my lifetime, because so many more people who are vastly more talented than I will ever be will not get to see that in their lifetime. And history is full of stories of writers, painters, musicians who get celebrated 300, 400 years after they're dead, and they would have died in abject poverty. I'm not saying that I'm becoming super rich through the deal. What I'm saying is that I'm getting paid what I believe I rightly deserve for the work and effort that goes into it. And that is such a huge boost. The money is good, but again, the mental validation.
Yeah.
Because with art, a lot of it's about the mind and how it's nurtured and supported, and how it's fostered and allowed to grow and experiment and embraced by different consumers. So it's just such a joyous thing to happen and to have happened in my lifetime.
Yeah, definitely. It's a huge milestone. So how did you celebrate?
How did I celebrate? I was kind of knee deep in writing Trishul, which is the military thriller that has just finished up in Indian Noir. So I was kind of lost in the mechanics of it. So truth be told, I was not able to enjoy it as much because I was in the middle of kind of cracking difficult plot decisions. But then I had a couple of days when I could take my mind off it. And then it was about talking to people about the news, the people who had supported me through the years. I think that was the big celebratory element. Just really talking about it to all these people I've met across 2.5 years, a bit more than that actually. But, reminiscing with them about the conversations we had about whether one day it would be monetized, whether the podcasting industry would just disappear. Is it just a bubble? Whether we would actually be in the industry 7 years from now. And instead we were talking about the fact that Indian Noir got monetized. So it was, I'm an extrovert and a big people person. And for me, a celebration always involves engaging with someone and reminiscing with someone. I'm one of these people who hates traveling by alone. I couldn't do it. It's only validated when I share the experience with someone. I couldn't go to movies by myself, like restaurants by myself. I'd really struggle. I really have to share the experience with someone. So that's how I celebrated. I, just reached out to everyone and had a great conversation about it.
And no, that's surprising that you're an extrovert because from your Instagram feed, you don't come off like that. We hardly actually see you or, your personal life per se.
Yeah, yeah. So I try to keep the personal life away from social media as much as possible consciously, because I am monetizing myself and my skill. I hate to drag other people who are part of my life into it. Um, but I have to say, my extroversion is now limited to engaging with artists on a one-on-one basis. I found that the world has become very introverted, and not just because of COVID. I think the trend has been going on for the last decade, and so for the opportunities for me to be an extrovert are quite limited, and that's actually fed really well into the production of Indian Noir, because writing at this scale and with this pace and with this volume demands a certain amount of introversion and application of mind and the body to the craft of writing, and prepping your body for writing, and doing the marketing and engaging with the people who are relevant to the industry. So so I suppose that's how my extroversion is practiced now.
Okay.
So there's a certain truth to what you're saying. Like if it's come across as that, it's because I've been much less extroverted in the last 10 years. Society's kind of taken away the opportunities from me. I don't know if it's my age group. I don't know if it's a different experience for younger people. But I think once I hit my early 30s, I started noticing this real drop-off in social engagements. And even if you go to a social engagement, it's wonderful to interact with people there, but then people don't take that next step towards building up a social connection and spending time. And yeah, so it's a complicated space. Good question, though. It's something I've been thinking about fairly recently, about how my life has changed and how my persona has changed.
I actually wanted to ask you this later, but since you brought it up, writing is a very lonely process, right? And more so now during this pandemic, we're all connected on social media, but in a sense, we've all been detached and kind of by ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, what has your mental health like been as a writer? Has it taken a toll?
Yeah, great question again, Mahati. Again, because it's something I have been thinking about in particular over COVID. I think yes, writing is very lonely. If you have a writers group, you're very lucky to have an environment where you can share the experience. Good writers groups are so hard to come by. I had a very lucky period in my early 20s for 3 or 4 years where I was part of a wonderful writers group, which I absolutely cherish. But then post that, I've been to multiple groups and they've just all sucked, really. And I've gone for a day and never wanted to go back again. And so then the process becomes quite lonely. But then what happens is that as you start getting really good at your craft, it demands more time and attention from you.
Yeah.
A space of introversion, being almost a hermit, and practicing your meditative skills, your skills to be able to chant mantras. So it's a very similar experience. You devote your life to it. So I think what saves the mental health in that instance is the absolute immersion into the world of your craft, and then having the kind of the relationships you have with your audience. And I think with podcasting, there is this thing, and I'm sure you've come across the term parasocial relationship through social media, where you do see people and you feel like you have a relationship with them, which I'm pretty sure you do, particularly in this day and age. I think 5 years ago, if people were laughing at it, I would kind of understand that it's legit. But that's how most of my friendships are these days. They're very social media oriented. There's probably like 10% of face-to-face catch-up. Most of the time, that's how we stay in touch. So the interactions that I have with my listeners or other podcasters, that's no different. So they're equally legitimate and important to me. So I've been having a lot of those parasocial relationships, and good friendships in the industry now with podcasters and streaming providers and people who work there. And so that's been keeping my mental health buoyant. But also, the skills over the 2 decades you kind of develop with writing. You have to go to the gym regularly. You have to, entertain yourself, have conversations outside of writing, go for walks around nature, all those regular things that you would do to maintain mental health. That'd be good. I think what really affected me over the COVID period was definitely the second wave in India and the absolute carnage, the
I know.
daily images of death that, while I try to avoid it, but also because I am away from India, you do want to know what's going on in India. You are kind of forced to watch it. And that definitely, I found it very difficult to work over several weeks. I had to really, really pull myself out of a bit of a hole to be able to re-engage with my work. So yeah, the world does affect me, but not so much the world of the craft, the external world. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even for me, I want to stay away from such news, but being a journalist and I'm always, have an interest for current affairs, it was very hard to, it definitely takes a toll. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to come back to, now that you're going to be exclusive on Spotify, Indian Noir. How do you see it play out for you as an artist? And as for your content, how do you see it play out from being an independent podcaster to now being backed by a platform?
Yeah. So I think what I've done with my deal with them is that I have maintained a certain amount of independence in the way I work. It's just in the amount of content that I need to give that I have contractual obligations, but I've taken away any restrictions on the work that I do. And the exclusivity period is for a few years. And then outside of that, it may continue or may not continue. But the way I see this deal is that it is an opportunity to build a relationship with one of the biggest audio streaming platforms in the world and have access to their expertise, their marketing teams, to have access to their platform, which is growing in popularity, and to see how well the podcast does on there. I'm a Spotify user myself, and I would love for people to actually listen to Indian Noir on Spotify because of the ease with which they enable playlist creation, the user interface. So that was a no-brainer on that front as well. And I think now that most of us podcasters who have been in this business for 2 to 3 years are trying to monetize our work, we also wanted to go with people who we were very comfortable kind of working and engaging with. And Spotify is a team that I've engaged with for the last few years for various purposes. And they've always come across as people who really want to support content creators. All streaming platforms are like that, but I think with Spotify in particular, the transition process has been very creator friendly.
That's good.
They've been very fair with pricing the content. They're not trying to like some of the conversations on the monetary front can be very disheartening, but that was definitely not the case with Spotify, because they believe first and foremost they are an audio company. They're here in this for the long run, and they want to attract the best people into their platform. So there's that additional validation of that. So what I see this as is another challenge to bring more people on Spotify on board and hopefully draw people in who are already listening to Indian Noir into the platform to continue listening to it.
Right.
So the first 150 episodes will be free for listening everywhere and every other platform, and post that during the exclusivity period, people will have to go into Spotify to listen to it. So it's another challenge, and challenges are very good for an artist. It'll be now I'll have to particularly rely on my social media as well to draw back in anyone who has skipped the step of downloading Spotify and following me on there, to make sure that the entire audience base comes over to listen to it.
And this exclusivity comes into effect from June 15th, right?
Correct, yeah. So for June 15th onwards, and like I said, the number of years, it depends on how the podcast does and the Spotify's user base has and how successful I am in drawing my existing audience in there. So hopefully that'll all work out really well. And like I said, that is going to be the challenge, and it mixes things up. Things change every year in the podcasting landscape. But I think given that ads are nowhere to be seen, I mean, I don't know how many years it's going to take for the ad business to sort itself out globally and in India. But in the absence of that, it is so heartening that a company like Spotify is willing to invest in podcasters. And it's not just me. So many great Indian podcasters have managed to find a home there. So it's really what they've done is protect an art form, protect the creators, and protect the ecosystem from just disintegrating, because a lot of people just give up and leave. They wouldn't stay.
And in terms of ads, like you mentioned, though I have listened to a few ads say it was usually on podcasts backed by networks.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a long time before, I think, for independent podcasters to get monetization through ads. And even if those two brands fit, that is, to your style of podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a regular conversation I have with, like, every few months there'll be someone coming in and saying that they've cracked the advertisement code for podcasts, and they'll find me ads, and then I never hear from them again. When Audio Boom was around, I made ad revenue from them, and they were very good.
Okay.
But then when they exited the business, that was the end of it. It was because Audio Boom had access to a global ad stock. Post that, obviously, with Anchor, the ad system has not been switched on in India. When that gets switched on, I think that is a very hopeful scenario. Outside of that, a lot of the Indian companies that have popped up offering to be a marketplace, they're just not able to generate any interest. So, which is very sad. I really hope that system works, because it'll create an entrepreneur class out of people who will want to engage in that space, and it'll support podcasters.
Yeah.
And then there is the whole issue of some of the companies in India just not understanding how much better engagement there is in audio versus video. And I just beg and pray that they stop comparing podcasts to Instagram likes. You can get 150 likes, but people are just thumbing it and moving on to the next thing. There's no real engagement. It's to have like the kind of engagement and retention rates of like a show like Indian Noir, it's gold. With 80 to 90% retention rate, that's 2 ads you can run, the beginning and the middle, that they'll get you the attention of whoever's listening. But yet, someone was telling me about a speciality show that they were running. I'm not going to take any names, but it's such a great podcast. They approached a brand which would have had great synergy with it, and they were just offering a pittance for it and treating it like it was a social media ad, and in the end, even though there was some money involved, the podcaster just backed away, saying, "This is just, the worst thing about this is you're not understanding the medium, and it's insulting my intelligence." So yeah, that's a challenge.
That's really sad. But it's an interesting point you brought up, because a lot of people do compare how well a podcast is doing to its social media presence.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a great number of podcasts that are doing really well, say in the business segment, and hardly have a social media presence,
Yeah. There was a music band promotion company that came to me, and I gave them the stats and the data and all of that, and thought they would be impressed. But then they asked for my social media, and they said, "Oh, you only have this many followers." I said, "But I'm not running around in bikini pics and putting that up for people to enjoy. I'm a podcaster. Most of my work's on the app in audio format. That's where everyone follows me. Do you understand like how I am different from like your garden variety influencer?" And they just didn't get it. They never got back to me. But this is just a serial story. Every podcaster has thousands of these stories. This happens almost on a weekly basis to someone or the other in our community.
But do you think going forward, as podcasters, we need to start concentrating on social media presence, build up the followership? Do you think that's going to be important as well in building a community?
100%. Because take a niche podcast for like Indian Noir. The social media exists for all the niche followers. So as in the base that will never go away. the people who are driving you to make the work that you're doing. And so I essentially followed the 1,000 fans principle, in that, if you have a core audience and they are constantly listening to you and supporting you and they are vocal, then that's all you need to care about, really. Outside of that, anything is a bonus. I've been very lucky to have an audience which I'm exponentially much greater than that number, but I think the social media exists to service them, so that they can see how I work, they can see me, they can see the general vibe of the shows, they can enjoy a visual version of what they are consuming through the years, something to see, something to talk about, something to connect with. So I would say it is one of the first things you need to set up. And my advice is Instagram is king, I think. Twitter comes next. It's Instagram for your audience connection, Twitter for your journal connection with journalists and podcasting organizations.
To your thoughts.
Facebook for your family and 3 friends who support you but never listen to you. So have the 3 of them. It's very important to align your content across those 3. Make sure that your design and branding is spot on. Indian Noir is one of the best designed social media pages for Indian podcasts. I think it's very clear when people come onto the page what it's all about. It's bright red and full of skulls and bullets, blood, and it celebrates literature and everything audio in the form of poetry or snippets from the show, and it's a great PR agent for all the acclaim that the show gets. And if people scroll down from years back as well, they'll just see that it's got such a history of accomplishments and engagement. So, you wouldn't be able to showcase that if you didn't have social media. So 100% important.
Yeah. And, again, you brought up something that I wanted to ask you later on, but I'm going to ask you now.
Mm-hmm.
Your artwork is really, I'm amazed by it every time you post something, right?
Yeah,
so do you put in a lot of thought into it, or do you just let, whoever the artist you're asked to do it, to have a free reign? How does it work?
So firstly, I use Canva for most of my artwork. I love Canva.
So you do it yourself?
I do it myself.
Oh,
yes.
wow. Okay. That's amazing.
Yeah. There are a couple of times I have commissioned artists, like the recent Summer of Horror series has got a poster that was designed by Vibhu Kumar, who is an artist from Delhi. He did such a great job. When it's a bit complex, or it needs to be a bit different, it needs to capture a different vibe, I'll commission art, but that's rare. It's probably happened 2 or 3 times in the history of Indian Noir. But everything else, I designed it on Canva. And I've always had a good eye I consume a lot of art. I go to a lot of galleries whenever I can. I could never be an artist. I can't even draw a circle properly. But I have I have good taste in art, which means that if I'm given a tool like Canva and access to art assets, I'm able to put it together quite well. And so Canva has been such a lifesaver and so important to our social media strategy, and I just love the platform. It makes it so much easier.
True.
I did a couple of courses on how to brand on Instagram as well. The one I would totally recommend is one by Dot Lung, D-O-T. Her surname is L-U-N-G. She's an Instagram branding strategist, and she's got a course on Domestika, D-O-M-E-S-T-I-K-A, and on Instagram. And I took copious notes on what she thought was a good, what you need to do to create branding. So from font to color to the kind of iconography you use, I think that is really transformative for me. But like the podcast, the feed has also been experimental in that it's slowly grown and standardized itself for a period of time. There was a long time when it wasn't standardized, but it's gotten to a point where it is. And yeah, so I think it helps to have an artistic eye to design those things, and a bit of thought actually goes into it. I start thinking about it at least a couple of weeks before I put it.
Okay.
But you don't want to be too arty-farty either, and make it too difficult to see. You need to, just like the storytelling in Indian Noir, it respects the fact that people are scrolling past things at a million miles an hour. So it needs to be something that really captures their attention quickly and is not too busy. and captures the vibe of the show, meets the branding guidelines, all that good stuff. But thank you. I'm glad you enjoy the design.
I do. And it's just astonishing that this is something you do as well, including the painting those, you keep posting on Instagram, right? I was just amazing. Okay. How do you have?
Oh yeah. Oh yes, yeah. So I love. I have a story about that. I think this relates to the mental health thing. I found that I needed to do something for my artistic self because I have heard a lot of writers say that it's good to practice art because it really, as you would know, stimulates another part of your brain,
Yeah.
and which then feeds into your creativity, and it's very good. And I've totally found that to be the case. And secondly, doing something with your hand is so good for your mental health, so that you stop being in your head all the time and you're
That's
actually
true.
focusing on what's happening with your hand. So I started off with just trying to do sketches of things. I was terrible at it. I moved on to watercolors. I was terrible at it. I tried clay sculpting. I was terrible at it. Then I started urban sketching with a group. When I used to live in Canberra, we used to go out as a group and try to sketch buildings. It was terrible. Little children would do better jobs than that. And then
But it's nice you're trying all that. So that's what's important.
I tried all of that. Yes, I gave them, and then I just gave up. I thought, I'm totally useless. And then I love listening to Warhammer, which is this fantasy universe, and it's full of these amazing stories about fantastical creatures and futuristic wars, and it's such a it's great pulpy stories. And so they produce a line of miniatures that you can paint. And I thought, I better give this a try. And so they are the things that you see me sometimes post on the feed that I paint.
Right.
And they are so minute. You have to really pay attention to painting them. And if you spill over, you have to do it all over again. There's just all these and if you want to do it really well, you need to understand how the color wheel works and color theory works and shading and shadows and all that stuff. So it really forces your mind to focus on something else. So it's a good reprieve from writing, but it's a good mental health strategy too, just to work with your hand on something that's really micro and demands a lot of precise attention. So great for focus building. I just find it's so useful as an art form to practice.
That's really true. And better than just using your thumb to doom scroll.
That's right. I totally agree with you. But it's for me, I don't know what it's for you. It's YouTube. If I go down the rabbit hole of YouTube, I am gone for hours. Reels, they kind of can have a little bit of an impact, but the Instagram algorithm is so stupid. It's you can never flash up things that I'm actually interested in. What is it for you? What is the rabbit hole that you get lost in?
I usually go sometimes as tags,
Yeah.
and sometimes on my feed, whatever is there, I tend to follow some interesting accounts, and most of the times I do not go into the Reels tab, because I know it is like it's really a rabbit hole, because sometimes it's so fast paced and really grabs your attention.
Yeah.
And some of it you find it so funny. So I really love people who put comedy content. So that is something, and it takes my mind off things as well for a little while.
Right. Yeah.
Because you're laughing, and yeah.
Yeah, yours is one of the few social media accounts that I actually follow. I follow very few social media accounts, very few. I mean, handful. And I watch yours because I love the clips that you put from your previous interviews. I find them very stimulating and gets me into research mode for a lot of things that I didn't know before, which is very stimulating. But also, I love the quotes you put up. So there's very few good accounts out there, and getting lost in the mire of social media content. I mean, it's not good for the brain.
Yeah.
I really don't think so.
But thanks for letting me know. I thought I really need to up my social media game, because I'm quite bad at it. So
yeah, it's very good. You can always constantly keep improving, but you've got such a great start. Like, I love it. I love it. I think we have fairly aligned thoughts, Mahati, you and I. So
yeah.
Going back to that point about parasocial relationships, I think in a world, well, there's so many tools to get connected, but people are so disconnected. Some of these aspects that we mock actually, are such a useful way of linking with people too. I'm sure a lot of people have stumbled across Indian Noir as a total accident because of my social media posts and then stayed on. So yeah, double-edged sword. Yeah.
Yes. Coming to Indian Noir, I was actually listening to your conversation on the Writer and Geek show.
Yeah.
All three of you were discussing about horror movies, and it was such a trip down memory lane for me because I grew up watching horror movies. That's how I got into it. It's a genre that's very close to my heart.
Nice.
And like you, I started watching around 7 years.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it was 7. And like you said, back then, I think parents didn't really care about, what the kids were watching.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, I think it was through my dad that I got onto horror movies.
Oh, what a cool dad.
Yeah, but though later on, I think he stopped watching, probably to ensure the kids, don't pick it up too much, but it was too late for his third kid. Anyways, some of the movies that you mentioned, like Evil Dead and, The Fly, I was like, wow, just being reminded of those movies. So have you ever paid homage to any of those movies in Indian Noir?
Yeah, constantly. Like all art is derivative. There's no doubt about it. This idea of originality is just complete rubbish. Some people are just paying homage to someone else. Cormac McCarthy, who is a writer I absolutely idolize, who I consider to be the only writer, and I call everyone else typists. He has got this famous quote: "Books come from books," and it's so true. Like all of his work is a homage to Faulkner and Melville and other writers that he really idolized. And that is true for any artist. So there's plenty of homage in Indian Noir stories. There are a couple of ways in which I pay homage. So one is conscious, and I'll explain the reason for being conscious. And that aspect is trying to bridge Indian horror writing with the international literary traditions in horror writing, because horror writing in India has been this poor cousin of literary fiction.
Yeah.
Because we are too up there, snobbish, and we'll only write literary fiction. Obviously, regional languages writing's been thriving all over India, and it's amazing. I'm talking specifically about Indian writing in English. There hasn't been the ecosystem, the magazines to support horror writing. For that reason, the publishers don't really care. And so we have missed so many big traditions in horror writing, like Lovecraftian tradition horror writing, McKeanian traditions. So I'm trying to write stories that sit in that tradition. So that is an obvious way of paying homage. So a good example is this 6-part series, Bhangad, which is inspired by the King in Yellow mythos. And so it's one of the, I don't know of any other Indian stories that sit in that tradition. So in a similar fashion, I've done a couple of Lovecraftian ones. The one that's going to kick off the Summer of Horror series is a Lovecraftian story. So there are conscious ones where I do that. Then in the production side of things, it's a real homage to those older movies like The Evil Dead and The Exorcist that you were talking about. The kind of thematic concerns married with how horror movies are produced now. So the Insidious series of movies, which I love. I just love how they have managed to create a series. So, the Fear FM pays homage to that. Also, in terms of homage, it's a process of constantly keeping an eye on what's being produced, so that that can then be used to inspire the production quality. Because like I mentioned before, the visual medium is where technology and ideas and the best brains are working together to produce stellar art. So it behooves anyone who works in the audio medium to pay attention to it, and particularly if you're a horror creator, that is what your primary audience is consuming. They are going to expect that kind of quality out of you. They're going to expect the quality of the new work that they really enjoy, and they're going to expect you to give the nostalgia of the work that they enjoyed when they were a kid. And for that reason, absolutely, you have to have those connections in your work.
That's true. Yeah. Do you really record in a dark room?
Good question. No, I have to. I do it. I record it in this room. It's just a normal study, and I've got the mic and the laptop raised up a bit. The laptop will have a teleprompter program running the script. There's a treadmill behind me. There is my PlayStation that I play on. But I need to take a break on my right-hand side. And the only horrifying thing I suppose I have here is if I look straight up, I have got this beautiful painting which was created for the poster of the movie Alien Covenant. It's all the xenomorphs, the creatures. So I'll send you a photo of it after we record. So it's all the xenomorphs.
Sorry, why is it not on your Instagram?
I have put it up in a study. I put it up in a story ages ago. I will put a post about it.
Yeah,
that should sit in the grid. But so I look up at it. So it's xenomorphs and the face huggers and the I'm going to get in trouble for this because I've forgotten what the alien god-like creatures are called. The engineers, sorry, are fighting out in this kind of evolutionary battle. And it's a beautiful piece of art. And if I look at it, for me, that captures everything great about horror. That's the most horrifying thing. But no, definitely in a well-lit room, so I can see all the recording equipment.
That's good. Going back to your initial days as a writer, I actually read some of your short stories that you wrote.
Yeah.
Like The Note.
Oh my God, so embarrassing.
No, it was interesting. The Note and Snake Oil Cure and Skin is the Enemy.
Yeah. Did you come across The Prostitute, which is my most read story?
Yes, The Prostitute. Is it?
Because people search for porn in India, and that's how they end up on The Prostitute. And then they read the story and they really love it. It's funny. So many people have said this to me. The Prostitute is actually based on a true story. I had a friend who worked as an NGO in one of the red streets in India, and it's a story they told me about something they encountered in real life. Yeah, but thank you for going back and reading all those stories. I'm eternally grateful to you.
No, not at all. It was interesting, and I would have read more, but some of the links I think had expired or were broken, so unfortunately it wasn't available anymore.
That's right. So before I had this life, I was published in about 150 magazines, literary magazines, translated into 3 or 4 languages when I was writing literary fiction. Yeah. But a lot of those magazines have just imploded. Nobody reads literary fiction anymore. But they were the formative years. They were very important, I suppose.
Yeah. And you have a really great history of your work, right? And obviously you won awards for that and all. And I was equally surprised you wrote under Bhavana Murali.
Yeah, under my mother's name as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the pen name was interesting. So that's something that you considered at one point?
So what I wanted to do in that period of experimentation was really write in as many different genres as possible to build up my skills. So once I had kind of invested nearly a decade writing literary fiction and realized that was not going to go anywhere, I started writing genre fiction. So I went for the most popular one, which was young adult romance, and that's how I wrote under the name Bhavana Murali. And there was a company called Indie Reads that was going to set up and become a great success story, but that publishing company imploded within 6 months of it starting because they just didn't have their release strategy nailed, and they just made tall promises and it never went anywhere, and everyone pulled their work. And it was a very, very sad failure as an experiment for that company and all the writers involved. But there were about 30 or 40 writers who, we could have gone on to do great things in that space because it would have been a success story, but they just mismanaged the whole thing. So that imploded. I tried Wattpad to try and do that. I tried self-publishing on Amazon. None of that really worked because the market was too saturated. Everyone was putting the work there, and just like podcasts, there was the issue of discoverability, and a lot of people were good at writing or writing reasonably well. And so I kind of gave up hope, and I did not write for a long time.
Yeah, I think for 5 years.
Yeah, 5 years. I took a break, and I hated writing. I didn't want to go back to it. I was still learning how to write, mostly screenplay writing, and watching a lot of movies and reading stories and trying to understand structure, which I always did. I was always interested in it. And then out for fun, I started reciting poetry on Twitter, and
Yeah.
that really took off, and I had a lot of viral hits. And then it struck me that the reason why those one note experiments never worked is because you will find a lot of people who are very good at doing one thing, but to do narration, writing, audio engineering, and design, and to be good at everything, that really culls down the amount of people who be good at all of those things. So your competition pool is much less. So then I started investing in studying and learning and becoming good at all those things. So it demanded more energy and mind power and work hours out of me to invest in learning those things. But you can see how those early experiments were little building blocks, because by this time I got to podcasting, my kind of writing and understanding of writing structure was set, which is the most difficult part of producing Indian Noir, without a doubt.
Yeah, it gave you the foundation.
It gave me the foundation. So that is not a problem. That is a problem for a lot of people. Once they do a bit of work, then they need to go to the Himalayas for inspiration. They have to take some time off. When you have got your foundation as a writer very solid, you don't have a problem. You finish something today, you wake up tomorrow morning, you start again. Like, it's workman-like at that stage. So everything else I could learn and improve, like narration and audio engineering. And it kind of vibed with me a lot as well, putting those things together, because I watched movies very intimately, trying to understand how they were building stories in that tight 1.5 hour space. And I always thought visually and started writing visually over the years, and started consuming more things that were of a visual nature. So that all came together, but those initial building blocks were all very important.
And 3-part structure is what you follow for your own writing, right?
Yeah. So just the screenplay writing foundation, which is the 3-act structure, is what I use. It took me nearly a decade and a half to understand how it works. I had to read so many textbooks on writing to understand it. So I would read a book, make notes, read a book, make notes, make notes, try to write something and fail. And then I would understand that either my understanding of the structure was wrong, or I needed to spend more time doing it to really understand what I had taken notes on. And doing that over a long period of time, eventually it clicked, and eventually it fell in place. And it fell in place when I didn't have to make notes or write anything. It was almost invisible. And I always describe this as that scene in The Matrix where in the first movie, Neo eventually becomes a part of the Matrix, and the agents are following him, and they shoot at him, and all the bullets are coming towards him, and he grabs all the bullets and he stops it because he sees the Matrix for the structure that it actually truly is, the microstructures that make the macrostructure.
Yeah.
And once you understand that nothing is a problem for you, you start seeing everything very clearly. You don't have problems. You might have to step away sometimes to allow the mind to work through a problem. But at least you have the capacity. You don't stall. You don't get a block for too long. Once you create a story, going back and creating another story or continuing that story is not a problem anymore. You know how to enrich a story. And by that, what I mean is, with the aid of the 3-act structure, you can add a grand theme into it. And then when people listen to it, they are not just enthralled by what's happening in that story. It's making people reflect on its thematic concerns. For example, the first season of Fear FM is a good example. It's about a man who is not particularly loving towards his mother for various reasons, having to look after her in a period where he's depressed and unemployed.
Right.
And a lot of people would have gone through this emotion at some stage in their life, even if it's in a partial form. So it gives them the opportunity to work through that emotion in themselves. That's why people like that story and relate to it so much. So having that structure is so helpful, to prop the foundation of a story, but B, to be like a cauldron into which you can add different things, and the masala mix will brew really well in it, and it's not going to spill out and go everywhere. And then it's a matter of like finding out if there's too much salt, too much chili, and then you know how to fix it. And that's the other thing, you know how to fix it. Yeah, but knowing the structure is just so useful. And it's not a magical thing that you can only learn from meditating for 100 years under a certain kind of tree. It takes a lot of reading different kinds of books, of which there are tons. And I've listed it on my Instagram page, and one of the highlights in under advice is all the books I had to read to try and understand it. And the short answer is yes, you have to read all of it to actually understand it. At some stage, it took me 10 to 15 years to understand it. It might take you 2 days. You might be an absolute genius. So you never know. It depends on your intellect and how you process. People who are very analytical, I think will find the structure quite easy to understand.
Okay.
But I'm analytical too. I took a long time because I didn't just want to understand it like an A plus B is equal to C way. I really wanted to understand it in such a deep way that I could make the work profound for the listener if I chose to. And there are two different processes, and that could perhaps take a lot more time. So yeah, it's a very handy structure to know.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to catch the second part of this wonderful conversation. And to stay updated on current episodes, don't forget to hit follow on your favorite podcast platform.